onto the stage to talk to us about the future's frontier, risk, regulation, and transformation. And to guide us through this and to chair this panel, Emma McDonough, well known to the ICA members, our current second vice president, leading light in the Women in Cotton initiative, and leader of her own business, AgriDirect Australia, is going to,
AgriVision.
AgriVision Australia. Forgive me,
okay.
Emma. Forgive me, Emma. Will lead us and introduce the panel. We very much look forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you, everybody, for coming back so promptly. Look, we're going to talk about risk regulation and the tech transformation, what's changing, what's challenging, and also what opportunities exist for the cotton world in this new space. But before we do that, I'd just like to make sure everybody is awake and alert. So we're going to do a couple of, excuse the pun, icebreaker questions for the audience. I'd like to see a raise of hands. How many people here have ever traded a futures contract, cotton or otherwise? Okay, all right, so we know what we're talking about. And the next one is, again, with a raise of hands. With climate change and sustainability being such hot topics, how many of you think that this could impact cotton pricing in the next 5 to 10 years? Okay, even more than our futures traders. And then looking ahead to the next decade, being slightly controversial here, how many of you think that platforms like ICE will play a large role in the hedging of cotton? Ooh, not so sure about that.
We've got a big job.
You do? Okay, let me introduce our esteemed panel. We've got Matthew Ryan, who has over 30 years' experience in soft commodity markets. He has an extensive background in options trading, and since joining ICE in 2015, Matt has led the company's global soft commodity markets, overseeing the futures and options markets for sugar, coffee, cotton, canola, and frozen concentrated orange juice, commodities for which ICE provides global benchmark pricing. And prior to joining ICE, Matt spent more than 2 decades trading physical futures and options, holding positions at Macquarie Bank, ED&F Man, Vermilion Asset Management, Engelhardt, and as a floor trader back in the day, on the New York Board of Trade during its acquisition by ICE. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Finance and Mathematics at Northeastern University. And we have Jennifer Ilkew joining us. As she's president of ICE Futures US, a regulated futures exchange and a subsidiary of the Intercontinental Exchange. Jennifer previously served at ICE's head of Asia Pacific, where she managed the sales operation and overall business affairs for ICE in the region. Jennifer also played an instrumental role in ICE's acquisition of Singapore Mercantile Exchange in 2014 and the subsequent development of ICE's first exchange and clearinghouse in the region. And last but not least, we have Darren Long, a senior trader with Ecom Group and deputy CEO of Ecom USA. Darren oversees cotton trading and operations with Ecom USA, and he's been involved in the cotton industry since 2008, serving in a variety of roles with Ecom, physical cotton trading and business development, research and analysis, and commodity derivatives, trading in the US and overseas. Darren is currently the chair of the American Cotton Shippers Association, and he's been a board member there since 2021. And he's also a delegate at the National Cotton Council. After growing up in Virginia, Darren received a bachelor's degree in James Madison University and a master's degree in international relations from the Fletcher School at Tufts University. He's based in Connecticut, where he lives with his wife, Caitlin, and their 2 boys. So thank you for being with us today. And I'd also like to note that both Jennifer and Matthew, it's your first time to attend an ICA trade event, so we really appreciate you traveling to be here. And hopefully it's not the last one that you'll attend. So if we could just give a round of applause to the panel, please. Thank you. So when we consider risk, it's always with a view to managing the uncertainty we face. And in the last couple of days, we've heard a lot about uncertainty and unpredictability. And I'd just like to set the scene a little bit and ask Darren, over the last 10 years, how has risk evolved for you as a trader, and what have you seen as the real standout changing points?
Sure. Thank you, Imar. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with you. So I would say from a commercial cotton risk manager perspective, there's two broad buckets of risk that we face. I would say the first being positional, really, things that we can control, sort of what positions we get into, such as basis, calendar spread, flat price. I might have an options book, Greeks to manage, things like that. And then the second basket being sort of execution, operational risks, things like logistics, credit, financing. Those are broadly the same, I would say, as 10 years ago. Those are the same kinds of risks that we're managing. The new one that we're seeing is with the increase in, say, sustainability or traceability, there's additional complications there. That's really the one that's changed in terms of being something that is just a much bigger factor that we have to watch out for today. But really, there's a combination of these risk factors. And we were joking about it on our US team recently, as we were saying, when are we ever going to get a normal year in cotton? And of course, there isn't one, right? Because you have these combination of these different risk factors. Each year is a little bit unique. So we're kind of on this heightened state of alert at all times for which of these things do we need to manage. Our cortisol levels are probably through the roof compared to a normal person in this room, I would say. We all are managing some aspect of this. But through that kind of constant state of readiness, the trading industry is extremely adaptable. We kind of have to evolve and adapt or die. And with each of these challenges that we've had in recent years, and if you look back over the last 10, let's say COVID was obviously the biggest shock, where we saw multiple risks occurring at the same time. At one point we didn't have people going to the office. Forwarders couldn't get docs processed. You had a shortage of trucks. Didn't know how are the ports going to be operating. All these things. So, but with each one of those things, we built tools, I would say, to address and monitor those, and things that are in place today. So if we run into issues like that again, we're a bit stronger. So I think resilience is kind of the topic there. And really, it's the tools that have changed, I'd say, rather than really the risk, the nature of the risks themselves.
Yeah. And it is interesting because resilience is really one of the things you have to cultivate once you have those global shock moments, and hopefully we do learn from those. Something that's changing very much in the last couple of years is regulation, and I know we've always had geopolitical interference in trade, whether it be China, US trade tensions, or other UFLPA type legislation. But the tariffs are new, and they're also changeable. So how do you look at that from a trading landscape, especially when you're looking at forward purchases and sales? How do you view it, and how do you use your resilience to manage the risk around that?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So we're really in year 2 of this, in the sense that, if you look at raw cotton trade itself and tariffs, really, let me back up. A lot of times people who are in other industries that I meet will say, with these tariffs, your market must be crazy. It must be extremely volatile. And I usually think, okay, how do we sell this guy some vol? Just kidding. But the reality has been, cotton is sort of infamously lacking in volatility over the last year, which if you'd asked people that, say, in November last year, I think no one would have, or not many people would have predicted sort of the lack of volatility that we've seen. And I think a few reasons for that, being that really with the U.S. Imposing import tariffs, there's really only one market that imposed new tariffs on the export of U.S. cotton, which is ultimately affecting our futures market and our flow of U.S. cotton, and that was China, of course. Mm-hmm. So, and that was sort of anticipated. That's why I say we're in year 2, because the Chinese buyers largely anticipated some deterioration of relations between the U.S. and China going into the election, and we shipped about 700,000 bales in 24-25 to China. That was front-loaded. So, and now we're seeing effectively with these tariffs, zero flow from the U.S. to China, and it will be that way until the tariffs change. But at the same time, that flow out of the U.S. really was moved into other markets. We still exported most of our bales from the U.S. last year, so that flow changed, but really the world absorbed it. So we have a little, 700,000 bales additional of homes we have to find, or home for bales we have to find this season compared to last. But other markets haven't responded with tariffs on the flow of raw cotton. It's more further down the value chain.
Yeah, exactly. From the spinners and garment manufacturers' point of view, where it's tricky.
Yep.
Yeah. But we're not. What you're saying is, apart from the lack of import demand from China per se, the cotton is finding its way into other markets. So it's not. Yeah. It's slightly contributing to the uncertainties, contributing to lack of demand, in your opinion?
I'm sorry, can you...
Is the uncertainty around tariffs contributing to the lack of demand?
Yeah, so I think in the short term, there's so much unpredictability and uncertainty around tariffs. You see brand CEOs saying it's their number one concern in surveys recently is the inability to plan. In a way, that sort of delayed the impact because people haven't changed behavior as much. And I even heard from somebody yesterday that in their apparel exporting market, the apparels are choosing to eat the cost of that effectively because they say, well, this is in the long term, this has been a profitable business, and we kind of can't respond to something that we don't know if it's going to change in a few weeks. So that, in the short term, has probably reduced volatility because some of the flows haven't changed as much. In the longer term, there's certainly the textbook theory is a deadweight loss. If you have additional tariffs, you're going to lose some demand, and I think that's true. But we have to, I think the flows will change more the more time, if the state of the world today persists with the current tariff scenarios, you'll start to see flows change more going forward. So I was talking to one brand who sources apparel from China, and they're a U.S. brand, and they wanted to buy products made of U.S. cotton. Well, they were completely unaware that if we're not selling cotton to China, eventually that supply will dry up. So and they weren't aware. Okay, well, we won't be able to get U.S.-made apparel out of China to the U.S. Okay, so that's interesting. And then, but you might see flows change as well. Like, could we see more U.S. cotton sold to Vietnam that then goes into China in yarn and therefore supports that trade? So it could support that and just reorient things. But I think to answer your question overall, yes, there's a deadweight loss to demand probably, but it's been slower to play out probably than people would have expected.
I suppose the counter to that then is BACA, to try to promote the consumption of U.S. cotton in the U.S. So yeah, we might see a little bit of a shift on that if that actually gets through. And Jan and Matt, what are you seeing in the tariff space? Is that impacting commodities? Is it having any impact on how ICE is seeing trade flows?
Want me to go with that? Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it more, not so much in cotton per se, but in other markets like coffee. They've had a big impact. But, geopolitics is always something we can't control.
Yeah.
So
watch this space. It
Yeah.
will change. Yeah. And Jen, other regulations, so we're looking at things that are challenging and new. Is there anything that's impacting what you're doing in the ICE space?
So on the ICE side, we are regulated by the CFTC, and there's been a lot of changes with the new administration, with the SEC and the CFTC and how they're working together. I think what we're seeing is probably the last 10 years, this is the biggest shift in change that we've seen is what's happening to the futures markets. The CFTC is in a little bit of a flux at the moment. They have a acting chairman Pham is there, and they're still trying to find a permanent chair to come in. And without having a permanent chair, you have a lot of uncertainty about what's coming in. We've also seen a lot of exodus of staff at the CFTC, and a lot of those people who are leaving are staff that understand the futures markets in eggs and understand the futures markets in energy. And as we see them leave, they're not being replaced. And there is a strong focus on digital assets, prediction markets, sort of the new shiny thing in the US at the moment, and really being pushed by the current administration. So we're trying to spend a lot of time with the staff at the CFTC to make sure that the agricultural markets are not forgotten, particularly the cotton markets, and also to go in and do teach-ins, so those staff who do not have a lot of information, they are now trained to be able to make sure that they can make these decisions. There is sort of rumors and concerns within our side of the markets that the CFTC might be brought up into the SEC, which we don't necessarily agree with. We really want to make sure that people are focusing on the ag markets, the commodity markets, and it's not just being swept under the traditional banking SEC regulation. And these shifting sands are making it very difficult to strategically look at what's happening going forward. So it's almost, and Matt and I are probably in each other's office every day trying to figure out what's happening, what does it look like, how do we adjust our thinking? So there is no what is the future. We keep sort of taking it day by day.
Yeah, so it's around functionality. When some of that infrastructure and things like CFTC changes or shifts, it can really affect functionality of the market.
And I guess it's not functional. It's trying to figure out. We want to make sure that we have a cotton market, a cocoa market, a sugar market, if we're looking at the soft commodities, whereas there's liquidity, where people are able to trade and they understand what's going on, and that there's clear regulation. If you don't have that, then there's a lot of uncertainty that can drive down liquidity. And as soon as you drive down liquidity, people can't hedge their exposure as much as they can. So there's the lack of the risk management tool. And our job is to make sure that that stays relevant.
Yeah, and we're going to touch on the financialization of the markets a little bit later. I just want to stick with regulation for a moment. And the second question to the audience was about traceability and sustainability and a lot of the expectations of impact on price. So we're seeing regulation in the EU, particularly around sustainable product design, etc., and the Green Deal. These governments and businesses coming to adjustment with climate change, with the 2030 commitments, are very real, and there's a lot of legislation. About 193 countries have implemented legislation around carbon emissions, etc. So just looking at, and I know it doesn't directly impact cotton, but it's new, it's the ICE Green Trace. That's something around collecting data. Is that as a result of where we're going with sustainability and traceability, or is that a completely separate?
So ICE is the largest environmental futures exchange in the world. So we bought the Chicago Climate Exchange and the European Climate Exchange probably about 15 years ago. And in a number of these markets in Europe and in part of the US, you have compliance markets. And these compliance markets require firms to make sure that they are not exceeding their carbon allowances. If not, they can buy futures contracts to help to offset that. So when we look at Green Trace, a lot of this is really focused on the existing compliance carbon markets that we have out there and making sure that there is a registry where people can store these products. So it's not necessarily linked to our current futures contracts on the soft side, but it really sits with our environmental space and helping to develop that in the compliance and trying to look forward to the voluntary space. There's a lot of voluntary carbon trading that is done, but none of it is brought in onto the exchange. So it still tends to be a very opaque market, and people like it as an opaque market. It hasn't been able to be as transparent.
I think just on that carbon piece, and probably to Darren, we hear a lot about carbon in the cotton space now, whether it's around regenerative farming practices, etc., and it feeds into that sustainability piece. Somebody asked me, made a comment, well, why would you talk about carbon? It's totally irrelevant for cotton. Mm-hmm. Is it or isn't it?
Well, I think it is to some, and it's not to others. I mean, the idea of sort of a mandatory, cap and trade emission system in the U.S. right now is not on the table, to say the least. So not from that perspective, but I think due to brand targets or of some of them, there are still many that are interested in it and are interested in collecting, data if they can at the farm level to understand how something's being produced. That said, the cotton farming stage is 10, 15%, let's say, of the carbon emissions throughout the supply chain. So I think they're likely to focus, largely on the finishing, dyeing stage as well. But certainly there are definitely many, I think, that continue to look for that information. It is a challenge in cotton, which is an annual row crop, and we see rotation, which makes it difficult to monitor year in, year out. If a farmer's producing cotton one year, a different crop the next year, it presents a bit of a challenge to sort of monitor that and verify it year in and year out when you might have a different buyer of each of those crops. Whereas for a formal carbon market, you'd like to see multiple years of monitoring on the same level. But yeah, so I think it is certainly relevant to many are still looking for it, but more for their own internal targets or commitments.
Yeah, so we're not at the stage where we see a carbon price giving a value add to a bale of cotton today.
Today, I think it's due to challenges with the sort of the monitoring and the implementation. It's hard to see it affecting a large number of acres at the moment to see the demand for it right now. But I think I always to add another angle is the traceability is something I've talked a lot about in the U.S. industry, and I think that's for the primary focus for everyone. Because while there are some brands that are looking for that the carbon element, they're all looking for traceability, and you can't really have the carbon sustainability angle without also having traceability. And I think there's a huge challenge for us on the traceability side to make it easier for brands to comply with regulation over the long term.
Back to the regulation again, isn't it? Like that's the whole purpose for looking at this traceability. And you can't have sustainability without traceability because you've got to prove it. Just sort of stepping a little bit forward, Matt, reflecting on the tech changes. So when you first started trading compared to now, huge changes in the tech space. So where do you see it sitting now, and what's your view of the direction we're going in with tech changes on the trading floor?
Sure. When I started in the business, I stood in the bottom of the ring, and I was the algorithm, right? You guys would send orders in, would get shouted to me, I'd shout a price back. I'd trade options off of printed sheets of paper. It was very, very arcane. But in the last 20 years, we've closed the floor, moved to an electronic environment, and we've kind of seen technology follow along, and it's been a sort of a nice progression. But now with the introduction of AI and machine learning, I think we're at a point where that curve starts to go like this. And we will see, in 10, 15, 20 years, we'll be seeing information flowing really fast with everyone's systems in this room reacting to it simultaneously. So, we'll have longer-term market volatility kind of compact, but intraday changes to information, those spikes will be sort of sharper and more unpredictable.
Yeah. So. And so are you talking about predictive AI or generative AI?
I'm talking...
Predictive is currently what's...
I'm talking about now, you go into everyone's office and they have a ladder up and, they're looking at prices, and I'm saying in 10 or 20 years, you'll go in and just look at a dashboard. You'll stop looking at a ladder. Your system will be intelligent enough to tell you what you should be looking at and what your risks are. And, we have all these bits in place now, but when it's all combined into one live intelligent system, I think it will change how everyone here functions in their daily job.
So will we have humans and technology, or technology and humans?
No, you'll have intelligent systems run by humans, right? It'll be like your co-pilot. You'll be Maverick, and you got this guy behind you telling you what's going on around you.
Yeah. Darren, from a trading point of view, how does that sit with you from that predictive side of things? If everybody has access to the same information, where's your point of difference?
Yep. I'd say right now we're seeing incredible utility out of the basic tools that are out there. Just to give it's helping us process and gain information a lot faster. I mean, even just your publicly available or low subscription tier models. Just to give an example, we were on a call the other day discussing the government shutdown, and within I can see on the video call 3 people searching it up, and within 10 seconds we've got a list of every shutdown that occurred historically, how long did they last, what were the issues. That would have taken us a lot more time historically to look that up, and then we said, okay, well, what are the prediction markets saying about how long it's going to last? And it said about 20 days. So literally in a matter of a minute, we had an answer to something that we would have just had a much bigger blind spot or uncertainty about, and you can repeat that over and over. So it's quite useful to us in that regard. And I guess we can go a few different ways with it, but we see there've been some reports of, say, quantitative funds, looking to get into the physical trading market, right? And they're looking for more and more data feeds to pull into their model. So that's where we would see, as a traditional merchant, we would see more competition if they came in and started executing based on that. But I think that there's some real, challenges there. We're still very much a relationship-based industry, and there's, so as a trader, a physical trader right now, we have visibility of a lot of those different risks that I mentioned at the start, which in a way, okay, if you have an exposure to that risk, we have to manage it. At the same time, having that exposure gives you insight. A quantitative fund is not necessarily going to know, that we are seeing a shortage of drivers in a certain location, or it'll take longer for them to build a model to replicate that. So I think there's still an advantage to being in the physical market that all of us in the room are, and using some of those tools to help us, whereas somebody coming in still has to replicate the flows or models. So it could very well happen, but there are going to be a lot of challenges along the way, I think, and it'll take a while.
Well, Matt did say 10 to 20 years. I think he's being overly optimistic on that one. I think it could be a little bit sooner than that.
He's hoping he's going to be out of the market and
He's not a
retired
fan,
and not having to worry about it.
Yeah.
But it does beg the question, if information is that accessible, does it change liquidity potentially in the market? Does it attract more speculative view, or does it have any impact totally outside the physical movement of cotton?
Yeah, I think it'll actually enhance liquidity. Everyone will have sort of access to this information a lot faster. Yeah, we'll probably pull in more of a speculative element, but I think if anything, it'll enhance liquidity.
Yeah, okay.
No.
So it could be a good thing, Matt.
Long run, it's a good thing.
What are your views on high-frequency trading, and will we see it? Jen, I think I'll ask you this question because we did have a brief conversation about it earlier. Do we think we'll see high-frequency trading in the cotton market anytime soon? And maybe for the audience, just to talk about what are we talking about when it comes to high-frequency trading?
So, sorry, can you just repeat the question? If we're going to see high-frequency trading in...
Yeah, in the cotton market, so as in 24/7 trading.
Oh, for 24/7 trading versus okay, so there's been a debate in the US about bringing in 24/7 trading, and this sort of has really originated from the crypto markets, which trade 24/7. We were having push for two different things within this. One is a perpetual contract, which is continued trades 24/7. And if you're in the crypto markets, people are trading these perpetuals all the time, all weekend. You're watching the markets, you're trading this. There's been a lot of pushback within all the commodity space and even the equity derivative space. The equity markets aren't going to be open, but within the commodity markets, especially in cotton, nobody wants longer hours. They want shorter hours, if anything. We have seen the advent or the beginning of 24/7 trading in regulated futures markets, but just in crypto. Coinbase started their contracts about 4 or 5 months ago. No real take-up on it that we've seen on the weekend. And no one has indicated that within the agricultural or our energy markets or environmental markets or anything else to have a desire for 24/7 trading. We might get there, and it depends who you talk to. I sat in with a crypto firm, and a guy who's 25 who thinks he knows everything told me it is the advent and everybody's going to be trading 24/7 forever. Going forward. I'm not sure I believe that. I think there's going to be a lot less demand for that within our traditional space. We have concerns that if there are exchanges that start offering 24/7 and you do see liquidity, so say we take cotton for example, if they're offering it and then they start having retail trading those markets, on the weekend you're going to see price moves. And what's going to happen on Sunday morning when the ICE futures markets open, is there going to be a shift? And it just depends on the amount of liquidity that sits in those other markets. And if you have, I would expect there's more retail, just to try to sort of game theory this out, if you have more retail playing in those markets, and then you have the market makers coming in to try to take out the retail markets, then you start having more liquidity and more potential price moves. And then it means that everybody has to start looking at those markets and where does this go. And this is one of the things where we don't know. A lot of it is it's going to end up being responding to demands in the market and what we're seeing happen. Mm-hmm. So, and we don't really see it linked to high frequency so much as this is a different. This is just a different issue separate to that, and this sort of need for perpetual contracts or this desire for perpetual contracts that they have in crypto. We don't see the need for this in commodities. There is no price convergence in a perpetual contract. It just continually trades forever and ever, where we really see the need for price convergence in the likes of any agriculture, any commodity market that we have.
Well, just sticking with you on that, when it comes to digital currency, what are we seeing in that space that could come in from a financialization point of view in the marketplace? Are we going to see digital currency being used to trade?
So you'll have seen that, or if you see Chairman Pham at the CFTC, she's trying to push for stable coins being taken as collateral. We're having more and more demand for, if you're going to have 24/7 trading, how do you manage that risk over the weekend? At this point, none of the banks are open. So how the clearinghouse works on our side for those who are not necessarily trading futures is we collect margin every morning, and we collect intraday margin at 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, depending on how price moves. We have a SWIFT account with the banks. We just basically pull the margin out of the banks, out of their account, and then we manage the risk that way. There is no ability to do that on the weekends, and the banks aren't open on the weekend. So how 24/7 markets are doing it now is they collect all the margin on a Friday. So they basically collect 3 or 4 days. It's actually 4 days worth of margin, because they're settling that that Saturday and Sunday contract on the following Tuesday. So if you had stable coins that you could use as collateral over the weekend, it gives you the ability to be able to manage risk over that. So we are looking at, could this be something that could be used? In the US as well, the US administration is really pushing the use of USDC specifically as a stable coin. USDC is backed by cash and US treasuries. They're really seeing that this demand for US treasuries is going to help to fund the US government. So they like the idea of more and more people buying US treasuries. From a clearinghouse perspective, if you look at the waterfall in a clearinghouse, if there's a default, we have to pay back money in fiat. So as opposed to a digital asset or a treasury, we need cash. And if there's a big market meltdown, it's not just ICE is having a problem, CME is having a problem, banks are having a problem, and the only way to settle this is through cash, and this is when cash becomes king. USDC, you basically have to take USDC, trade it into, and basically you sell it back to Circle, who runs USDC stablecoin. They'll give you cash in US treasuries. Then you have to take US treasuries and make them into cash. So it's not a very simple process. So what the clearinghouses do is they take a haircut to help manage that risk. So there's a lot of questions that we still don't know. So as much as the CFTC is trying to push this through, there's still a lot of risk management we need to understand. ICE is doing these things where we're trying to get ahead of this in case this comes through. We have a custodian for digital assets called ICE Digital Trade, so we can take in USDC, Bitcoin, and other digital assets now if we want to. There is ensuring that any of these stable coins, if there is a default, are in the name of ICE, so we can use it to be able to pay off any issues. So there's a lot of questions that have not been answered.
Darren, just to that point, how do you view that as a trader? How do you view digital assets in that space? Is it an opportunity?
Yeah, it certainly could be. We were talking about this morning, brainstorming for a little bit. Could it start to affect the payment for commercial transactions in the cotton market, where you could use some of these, stable coin or something like that? The technology's there for companies to issue those, right, themselves, and to use that as a form of payment, maybe speed things up, to make it almost instantaneous. You exchange documentation, and there's a payment that occurs, and kind of separate from the traditional forex system. So. Certainly is, but in early days, I would say, in terms of our industry.
When we hear about what's happening around CFTC and regulation and all of this new technology and AI, what concerns me a little bit is that we deal in markets for physical cotton where sometimes people don't have an email address or they don't have access to the internet in a stable way. Does that create a bit of a disconnect between what some markets can do in this AI technology-driven space and what some can't do? Does that create like a disconnect or inequality?
Well, I think for now, there's the access to it is maybe perhaps more equal than it potentially could be in the future. You know, if the example I gave, you know, that didn't cost us hardly anything to run that analysis. That's out there for anybody to do that. It's really more, you know, asking the right questions. How do you weight the different variables, which would take some experience, and you know, understanding of how to interpret it. If sort of let's just to think outside the box. If one entity were able to get, you know, perfect or near perfect information more than anybody else, and to monitor more things and sort of put that together and have extremely high, say, confidence about a wider range of prices than historically has been there, then you could sort of exert more influence over that perhaps, and then maybe that could feed on itself and others would have a harder time getting access to information. But I think for now it's more of a the ability is there for everybody, I think, to benefit from a lot of these things.
Yeah, I'm interested to know, do we see any regulation coming in around managing AI and access? Because there is a potential to weaponize AI in the space of who owns the chips, who's producing the chips. So we're already seeing some trade tensions around access to, you know, where this product is actually created and where it's made available. We don't really have set regulation around what that looks like today. Do we anticipate that will happen, or will we be looking at a protectionist issue around we can access this and we're not going to share it with anybody else?
I mean, I can take that. I don't know. I'm assuming there's going to be regulation on that. I don't think we go forward adjusting our strategy at the moment based on that. I think that's probably a little bit further out. That's sort of probably more of a question for the companies that are running the big AI platforms.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably no different than when you look back and when Facebook and Meta and all, when they started to be regulated and the social media started to be regulated, these are the things that they had to look like. And that's where they're trying to do it. We're not running AI platforms as ICE.
Yeah, yeah. Just again, coming back to technology, there's something that we didn't talk about, and I think it's the basis of where we get our data from, is technology on farm, Darren. I mean, look at what we've achieved in just the round module pickers and the access to farm data. And we were talking about that this morning as well, Matt, where you can actually get data from the seed. So is that something that you are seeing as the real source of truth, or like where traceability actually originates from, understanding what happened from the seed point of view?
Well, I think and I mean, you guys are probably using this information every day, but I think that information is starting to exist where you'll be able to follow a square meter on the ground from start to finish, right? So, yeah, you'll be able to trace it literally from the seed into the ground, to the bale, to the cloth. So, yeah, I think that's coming, and coming really fast.
Yeah, it sounds like blue sky thinking, but I mean, how far away is that kind of technology? It's probably accessible now.
Yeah, it's there now, but you know, we just haven't bolted it all together and into one.
Yeah, and the value proposition.
In one environment, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of innovation going on, I think, in the ag tech space. I mean, I've seen it in the US for sure. There's a lot of startups, investment coming into things, new technologies for, say, soil sampling, how to do that more efficiently, or monitoring, you know, different aspects on the ground through satellite data, you know, advanced weather forecasting. I think that there's a lot more precision happening, kind of analytics around the production side that is probably, you know, if you, like to Matt's point, if you combine it with the rest of the supply chain that could be useful in the supply chain, it's also useful from a market perspective and just having better information about what the crop looks like in advance. That the part that has been, and I think if you ask some funds, for example, they see they have quite high visibility into the production side as well through the use of satellite tools and so on. But the part that has been more opaque is really the demand side, and that's something that in this room we're much more in tune with, because it comes based on the flow of orders and demand from downstream. But that's where there's probably going to be increasing amounts of data and data points, things to monitor, is really on the demand side. I think we could see some improvement there that maybe help predict a bit more. I think you're already seeing it to an extent, but that could get built out as you have more detailed monitoring of sales, individual order flows, and AI inventory management, things like that. There's a lot more data being created about the demand side of the supply chain.
And obviously, most likely in spinning mill space as well, just trying to improve that productivity on the ground and reduce costs overall. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm just watching the time, and we've still got plenty of time for Q&A. So make sure that you're watching the Slido and putting in your questions. If we look at again, we mentioned how relationships are driven in the cotton industry. It's very much a relationship. You build up a rapport and you trade into the future. Are we going to see that change necessarily? Again, I suppose back to what are we expecting technology to do for us in the cotton industry, as far as are we creating efficiencies, or are we creating opportunities, or is it going to actually potentially create more problems for us? Yeah, Darren,
Sure.
like just from a,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I think in terms of efficiency, for sure. I mean, just something that's interesting to think about. In the context of, say, tariffs and technology. A lot of people said, well, are you going to see more manufacturing in the U.S., for example? And that's something that I don't think anybody foresees. Even you'd have to have massive changes to tariffs, really. But the goal of the policy isn't to make more T-shirts and socks in the U.S., really. The only way something like that changes if you could have perhaps advanced robotics to help with the sew piece of the finishing stage of the garment, and then you could you could do more on-demand orders for individual consumers who go on and design a product they want, and you're doing that in a much more productive way. But I think that's far down the road. I've heard of a few projects where they're doing that. A couple places around the world trying to combine the robotics and take out that part of the stage. But that's just one way you could see sort of the apparel manufacturing base move around the world. But
where we're looking at more of a nearshoring opportunity because of technology making production cheaper. Just a question to each of you, Matt. What do the markets need now? Like, what is the market looking at the moment? What is what matters most to the market, in your opinion?
What matters most to the market right now? I got to think about that one for a minute. I think more sort of. I think a few things I'd touch on. I'm also looking at questions on the board. I think we are at a point where I think the market is very concerned about what's coming down the pipe. Like, what is this going to look like in a couple of years, and where are commodity markets evolving to? And I don't think we've answered those questions yet. And I mean, from speaking to all my customers, like, that seems to be the big overriding concern at the moment. Like, kind of, where is this going? With 24/7 trading and all these things are going on around us, and I think some people would sort of like to put all that to bed, and we can get on with,
the day-to-day
running their businesses.
Yeah, Jen, do you have a view on what matters most?
Well, I take a lot of my views from Matt. He talks to the clients most directly. I think when we talk to clearing members, a lot of it is just regulatory certainty. I think when it comes to my role differs from Matt, whereas he deals directly with the clients on the soft side, and I have a larger role where we cover different products, but also deal with the regulators a lot more and the clearing members. And I think from our point, the clearing members, it's a lot of, they just want certainty. But that's in every market at the moment, and I don't think that is just an ICE thing. That is, no matter where you are, the current US administration is making the world a very uncertain place. So that's, everybody's struggling with that, and there's repercussions all over the world for that.
We're certainly seeing it from the demand side too, aren't we, Darren?
Yeah, I don't know if this is too temporal, but I think in the market at the moment, the cotton market, you know, the focus has been on the positioning and the size of the speculative positioning that's quite short. And people say, you know, why do the specs hate cotton? Actually, they don't. They love cotton from the short side right now because they're getting a very strong roll yield with the contango in the market. So I think that's really driven a lot of the positioning that's come in, you know, looking for that roll yield. It's maybe an underappreciated aspect of the market. You know, they're not necessarily looking at fundamentals outright. I'd say the bulk of that position. You know, fundamentals, there's certainly an argument for where we are based on supply and demand. But that shows up more in the order flow and the technicals that then reinforces that position. So I think that yield, you know, you've got, you know, 4.5 cents, 4 cents between the December and the July contract is quite an attractive yield for them. So they are in the market, and I think that's been a big driver. We can go on with that if you want, or do you have another question? Okay.
That's good. And I just wanted to, you know, we're again trying to project a little bit forward. We've got to get over the hump of the uncertainty to think about what are the opportunities out there. But what should we be concerned about, and what should we be excited about? And you can keep it as short as you like. So who wants to have a go at that first?
Let's go first.
Yeah. Excited about. Like, what's exciting about what we could see in the exciting about, yeah.
I guess on our side, okay, the regulatory side is really the only thing that I think I have concerns about. So I know you wanted not to include regulation, but that I think is probably the biggest thing we have. The thing we're most excited about is just trying to figure out what's happening in the digital asset and protection space. I think that's and it's going to cross all markets, and it'll likely get into the soft markets and the agricultural markets as well. That's probably what we're most excited about seeing happen.
Okay. Matt, do you have a?
Concerned? Yeah. Geopolitics is just the one that won't go away, right? Like, that is the big concern, I think, for the market is, you know, the speed at which that's happening and taking place. You know, what do we get excited about? Like, things I mean, our life at the exchange is pretty boring. We don't get excited about much, but yeah. Really?
Concerned about, I'd say, you know, probably what we've all been talking about, the demand side of the market, what Joe touched on yesterday, just, you know, the loss of market share. Textile Exchange just had a report out that showed it sub 20%, I think, for last year, so not great news. But in terms of being excited about something, you know, I actually talked about this at our AXA convention this year. You know, what we need is to reach a tipping point in demand. You know, you need several trends or factors to come together to sort of reverse the tide, and there's some things inherent to that. I think we are seeing some of it. You know, the three things that Malcolm Gladwell said you need to reach a tipping point are: you need a simple, clear, powerful message, which I think we have in the microplastics at the health angle. That's something that's new. The research is there, and you know, National Cotton Council's campaign that Marjorie's been leading to demonstrate a link between wearing synthetic clothing and finding microplastics in your body that's the last connector, I'd say, because people are aware of microplastics, microfibers are out there. They're aware that they're in your body and that's bad for you, but they're not connecting it to what they're wearing. So if that starts to happen, that's your message right there. You need a core group of people to push that, and I think we're seeing that. We're seeing, you know, the exporter associations have come together around the world to talk about this and, you know, figure out how do we get some resources behind these campaigns. And you need the right context, you need the right moment, and I think most people agree that, you know, our backs are against the wall, this is the time to do it. So I think that's possible. It's at, you know, a very low point right now, but we're definitely seeing, you know, I think some positive trends. You know, hopefully it looks the worst at the bottom, but.
Yeah, what is a challenge is also an opportunity, I suppose, in that space. And this is the first time we've seen that pre-competitive promotion of cotton, where we've seen competitors come together to tell that good cotton story. And hopefully we can use technology and AI to help us along that path. With 10 minutes left, I think we'll have a look at some of the questions. I actually can't see that first question on the slide because of the way the light is shining. So we've got to take a look at the second one. If the US increases their acreage and harvest in the coming year, do you think there would be a price war with Brazil, and would you cause the basis to collapse? Oh, goodness.
I guess that one's probably for me.
That's a Darren thing.
Look, if there's an oversupply of cotton and we're building ending stocks around the world, then to an extent, yes, we have to compete, and that has an impact on the basis. I mean, we're already seeing the basis has come off, say, for Brazil in compared to recent years. But either the market can do the job as well, and also having the carry in the market offsets that to some extent. When you have contango, it does allow you to carry cotton, and the U.S. as well has somewhat of a floor in terms of the basis given the delivery dynamics. The Brazilian basis actually seemingly stabilized recently. So, but ultimately, if we're in an oversupplied market, which fundamentally it looks like we're building stocks depending on whose numbers you use and where you think demand is. But yeah, there is certainly price competition. We're definitely seeing that. But there's also policies as well. Some of the U.S. Tariff reduction incentives are supporting some demand for U.S. We're seeing some retailers start to ask for that a bit more.
It just takes time for it to go through the pipeline. I think we've almost answered this. Do you think that the current net short position of managed money on cotton futures how do you think it will play out? Matt?
Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to have an opinion on the market, but
you're not allowed to have an
I'm not
opinion on
allowed
the
to have an
market.
opinion,
So back to Darren on that one.
That's a tough one. Maybe we can chat about that later on at the bar or the dinner.
But I guess there was another question up there which I would speak to. Just, 24/7 trading. I know we've talked about that. I think the exchange is run by us, and we don't see that as a good thing for the cotton market, and not something we would really be looking to embrace. Just like to make that point clear to the audience. That seems to, I get a lot of questions about that. We are concerned with a fair and orderly market, and that's our job. And 24/7 just doesn't really work in the cotton market. So it's about.
At the end of the day, do you believe faster information through AI reduces or increases volatility in cotton's future contract?
At the end of the day.
Faster information through AI. Let's say that. Is it more?
Yeah, I think
timely?
as everyone reacts to the same information, so longer term, I'm not sure I can. Longer term, volatility will compress as everyone has the same information, but short term, you'll see, sort of spikes with sharper, quicker movements as people instantaneously adjust to new information. So it's a yes and no.
Yeah. So longer, flatter, but then higher.
But, with little readjustments.
And one of the things that, it's not directly related to cotton, but one of the things ICE is doing is, with regard to the meme stocks that they have, a lot of that information comes through Reddit. So ICE has now got a platform where we pull all that information and we scrape the information off of Reddit, put it together in a very readable format so that hedge funds and managed funds can look at it quickly, because they're not reading Reddit the same way a retail investor is reading Reddit. So that sort of volatility in those meme stocks are really driven by retail investors. And if the funds and other players can get access to that information, you can help to manage that volatility a little bit. And it's just equal information for everyone.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Can digital traceability platforms be integrated with futures contracts to offer more secure and transparent trading?
Go ahead.
So we've started, and this is actually something that came out of the EUDR regulations in Europe, is we've started a platform called ICA, which will help to ensure that if somebody is going to deliver products into the exchange, they know whether it meets the EUDR regulations. And you could probably use the same thing on cotton if we expanded it to that, where, and from what I understand, and Matt, Darren have this, they know this significantly better than I do. But really, with US cotton, it's significantly easier to figure out exactly what's in each bale, what the grading is, where it comes from, which you don't necessarily get in other jurisdictions. So if we were just looking at US cotton, if you could put all that information in there, you could trace everything that goes back through a platform like the one we have, and I'm sure other players are developing that as well. And then you just link it to the futures market and what is required for delivery.
Yeah, for EUDR, we basically can trace a bean or cocoa or coffee back to a hexagon in West Africa. So,
Yeah, it's taking the speculation out of it a little bit, isn't it?
well, you know where it came from.
I think the last question there is probably not easy to answer, but what's the latest update on BACA and what's the likelihood of the act being passed?
That's not for me.
Darren?
Yep. At the moment, the government is currently closed, so I think it's on, nothing is happening immediately. The focus is on reopening the government. I think, getting, making sure, people get paid going forward. So I think, BACA is not immediately there, but at the same time, I think there is pretty broad support for it because, certainly from a U.S. perspective, it makes sense, right, to have demand for the products that you're producing. It fits with sort of the agenda of the administration. So I think there's the farm states certainly are in support. The retailers are certainly in support as well. So it's kind of a broad coalition that's in support of it. So I think ultimately we have to get through the current situation in DC, but it has I think a strong outlook thereafter.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that brings US cotton back into some markets potentially as well. Look, we're just about to wind up, but I would like to thank the panel, and I was trying to find a positive quote to end on, and there were a few philosophers that I looked at, but in the end I settled on the immortal words of David Bowie, and he said, "I don't know where I'm going from here, but I promise it won't be boring." So hopefully that's the case for us. So please, a round of applause and thank our panel for their participation today.
Thank you.
And can I ask that you just stay in the room for a moment? We're just going to give you an update on what Women in Cotton is doing. So just give us 1 second to rearrange the stage. And while we're doing that, can I ask the committee